Now would be a very good time to ask a question, and so I'll certainly be monitoring either the Q&A box. In fact, we do have a couple of questions in here, but let me just start out with one question to begin with, and that is, I mentioned that I attended the CIO conference last week, and I had an opportunity to ask a number of questions to CIOs, and one of the questions that I ask is, what are you all doing now in terms of software development? Do you see that continuing to move forward? And just about everybody was saying that, at least in what they do, and maybe this is more traditional IT departments, that more and more software development is moving off into the cloud, and they're moving away from customization type work into out of the box type applications. And so the question, David, that I have for you is how is that going to impact ControlM? And do you see that same trend happening, Ben?
So yes, we're actually seeing a lot of that trend coming for a lot of the industrialized IT components, not only ControlM. We actually have several customers on the West Coast that are running ControlM in the cloud. So they're actually running it on either publicly available resources from people like Amazon AWS and using it on EC2, or interacting with those things that are put into the cloud. In the case of Amazon EC2, Azure, and things of that ilk. And it doesn't really change how ControlM operates. As long as it has the ability to access the applications, the third-party technologies, the things that need to be executed and orchestrated together, he's not going to have any problem with that. So I don't expect that that issue would exist. And the interesting thing is, in the retail space, I have a lot of customers that are now starting to look at their agile development capabilities. So for technologies like Chef and Puppet and some of the other container types of implementations of agile development, Docker and so forth, we still need to have the ability to run work in those environments, and ControlM still has the ability to do that as well, even though those environments are small bubbles inside of a larger type of cloud-based structure. So we have seen that trend coming. We have been trying very hard to make sure that we have the interfacing necessary to make those bridges as well. And that's why Application Integrator exists. And later this year, we're going to be introducing some things to work with Chef and Puppet and Docker and some of the others as well.
Okay.
But yeah, it's something that we have been aggressively watching and making sure that we have the right development moves done to make ControlM still continue to operate in that scenario.
Well, it seems like ControlM can really just about interface to anything. It's a little bit, the analogy would be on the ITSM side, you've got Atrium Orchestrator, which is responsible for workload automation in terms of, for example, closed loop change management, right? You need that, and then ControlM is kind of the same thing on a larger scale. So.
That's very true. That's very true. And the interesting thing about it for us is that Atrium Orchestrator and ControlM work very well together. They're very complementary technologies, and we've seen a lot of people actually using the two together to do a lot of this closed loop type of processing, whether it's based on tickets that are being opened and root cause analysis and things like that in an automated fashion, or something more specific where I need to, based on something that happens in an ITSM structure, actually throttle back what ControlM is doing, or have ControlM do something different based on issues that are occurring that ITSM has picked up. Both of them work very well together.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go to some of the questions that have come in, and I'm not sure that I understand this one, but let me try to read it here. It says, can you explain how ControlM does essentially return codes? And then another question said return codes are different for each adapter/API/host.
So it really depends on what third-party technology we're talking about. The second thing it's going to rely on is how that information's brought back from the third-party technology. So if I think of, for example, databases versus SAP, the APIs are structurally different. The information comes from a different spot, and we publish what the API gives us in the case of return codes. So typically, depending on how the API works, we'll actually go through and figure out what return code we should be pulling back as part of the regular development of the control modules. In the case of application developer, you decide what return codes you wish to return, either based on what has been returned from the individual third-party technology's interfacing structure, or based on a combination of what was returned and what came from the output. And that's a very important designator here, because not only does ControlM look at return codes, but it also can search the output, looking for specific individual pieces of text in the output, and then deciding whether or not an individual object has successfully executed or not. So depending on how the API provides that data back, we either will parrot it back the appropriate way, or in the case of application integrator, use it as further interrogation criteria to ascertain the health and temper of what we've actually executed. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question here is, can you pipe a web-based self-service diagram flow URL via notification that would immediately take the developer to the flow that has errored? Did you follow that?
Yes, I did. Okay. And right now, we do not have the ability to do that as part of the undo capability of ControlM. So for those of you that are unaware, ControlM has the ability in every object to set up a series of what we call undo rules. On this happening, do something. One of those things is notification, obviously. I want to tell somebody that something's failed and either give them some kind of information or give them not only the fact that the job has failed, but also what the output was. That's really all as far as we've gone with that at this point. Now, what we would normally do in this situation is say, your job has failed. It is in service XYZ. Please look at self-service and have the self-service URL there so that they can log in and go look at it. And then also include in that email, for example, the collected output. But I don't have the ability to actually drive all the way into the actual job stream itself at this point, because the individual links would be somewhat different, and you would still have to sign into self-service to allow you to access that. So we've had the ability to publish the generic URL for logging in as part of our email notifications, but we haven't gone any farther than that.
Okay, and that kind of reminds me, I read a book not too long ago, and it was really required reading for everybody. It's a book called The Phoenix Project, and it was by this guy named Gene Kim, and it talks about IT. It's a fictional story, but it's certainly IT's from a CIO or director of IT perspective, and just about anything that can go wrong does go wrong within this organization. And one thing in particular, at the very start of the book, there's a payroll application, and it's presumably a batch job because it's a large company and they've probably got a lot of things all working together at the same time, that stops because apparently a rogue developer, I guess in this case is a guy that was really interested in security, removed some Social Security numbers, and as a result, this job just wouldn't run then. And of course, that's one of the worst things you can have happen. If you're an organization, you want to make sure your employees get paid. So then with ControlM, if this was running and the job stopped, there would be a notification process, and that could potentially get tied back to a system, like a service desk, right, that would sort of ring the alarm and say that we better send somebody to take a look at what just happened. Is that right? Is that how that works in ControlM?
Yeah, that's a very common use case. So if we think about the applications failing, we think of things being out of scope for execution time. We think of impacts of jobs not running in their execution time, as opposed to where they need to be in a service level deadline. All of these types of things are things that ControlM has already got instrumentation for to create notifications for. So whether I do it at the job level and say, okay, I want to know if this job runs 10% outside of its average duration, or if I do it more holistically, saying I want to manage, or I should say monitor, a whole job flow for its execution against a specific deadline for a given time of the day or a calculated time of the day. In that situation that you bring up, if the job is stuck, if it's not running, if the program is basically stopped, but the job itself is still executing, I have my timings to go out and say, okay, this job is outside of its scope. I want to send a notification to the application developer saying, hey, this job is run 10% outside of its average duration. Or you are having a problem because this job is running too long that is going to affect your deadline. That's something that we do all the time with the typical undo automation and things like Batch Impact Manager. And in the case of a failure, the same thing is true. So in this case, I've got DLE job 13 here that's failed on the screen. When that happens, I can set up rules to say, when this job fails, send email to Bob, saying that this job has failed, and send the output to them along with that email. So there's a lot of things that I can do just inside the ControlM application itself to notify folks. I also have the ability, because there's a bridge between ControlM and the ITSM tools for BMC, that I actually can post those messages to the TrueSight product line, for example, and have it go through the same iterative process that it would go through using Atrium Orchestrator to understand and correlate not only the fact that there's a problem in ControlM, but what else is going in the infrastructure and opening intelligent tickets and all of the other things that our friends on the TrueSight and the Remedy side do. So there's a lot of things that can be done, but the application itself obviously would be identifying those things in a batch mode, absolutely.